everybody, Joanie Somes here with On the Road to Safer Senior Driving. Today we're going to talk about occupational therapists and driver rehabilitation specialists. And that is a mouthful, just going to say. So you may recall from a previous session, one of the things we talked about is if someone needed to be sent to be reevaluated, they may end up with a visit to the certified driving rehabilitation specialist. Now that might be because the doc sent them. It might be because driver vehicular services sends them. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about that driver rehabilitation specialist. So the first thing to be aware of is that driver assessments vary. If you just need to get your license or need to get your license renewed, the driver vehicular services people might just do a vision check. They might have you take a written test. They might have you do the behind the wheel test. That's one way to get your license renewed. Sometimes you're assessed by your doctor. If you go in and they say, repeat these 3 words, draw me a clock with the hands to show 10 minutes past 10, and then they ask you to repeat those 3 words again. They're actually doing an assessment to see if you can remember how to drive well enough. They may send you to see the ophthalmologist to make sure that you have good enough vision to actually be driving out there. And then lastly, you may be sent to have a pre-driving screen by an occupational therapist. And there, they're looking to see, can you do activities of daily living? So there's a variety of different assessments that you may need to have. And interestingly enough, your driver rehabilitation specialist can do all of them. I thought I would just describe the difference between a driver rehabilitation specialist, an occupational therapist, and a physical therapist, because many of us are familiar with the physical therapist who basically focuses on improving your ability to move. They deal with your muscles. An occupational therapist will focus on your daily living things. A driver rehabilitation specialist can do both of these, but she more specifically looks at your on-the-road driving assessment. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what does that, I keep saying girl, it could be a guy too, that person does. They check your physical skills. They'll check your cognitive skills. They take you out on the road and check your driving skills, although some of them now have those fancy computerized cars, but more often than not they take you out in a real car with a real road and a real steering wheel, and that person has a brake as well as you. Some of the things that a driver rehabilitation specialist can do is after they watch you drive, they can recommend devices that will assist you to be a safer driver, or they may list things that limit your ability to drive but decreases your risk when you're driving. They can make recommendations about driving, and often what they end up doing is telling the driver and vehicle services people if you should continue to have a license and how you can continue to drive, or they may simply send that information to the doctor. So let's talk a little bit about this. So basically, when a driver rehabilitation specialist does that driving assessment, as I've mentioned, they assess your driving skills. They assess the impact of any of the deficits or disabilities that you may have on your driving and how safe you are. Typically, these take about 3 hours, and it involves a clinical assessment as well as an on-the-road assessment. And then, as I mentioned earlier, recommendations. What they're going to look at are a variety of things. From your medical history, what medical problems do you have? What's your driving history been like? Have you been in crashes? Have you been hitting the mailbox or the garage? Have you run into a police car or something bad like that? What medications are you taking? What is your physical status? They will actually do a vision test, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and they can do a reaction test. They will also do a cognitive testing where they look at how many things can you do at once? How good is your judgment? How well do you process things? And what is your ability to make decisions? And how good is your memory? Did you remember from the time you got in the car till the time you started the car where it was you were going to go with that car? Or even worse, do you remember where that car was parked? So when they do a vision test, they will not only do the regular vision check with the sign that you probably recognize from your doctor's office, They'll check things like your peripheral vision. They'll look for signs of glaucoma or macular degeneration. They'll check for cataracts. They will look to see if you have diabetic retinopathy, or even, and I loved this new word that I just learned, nyctalopia, or night blindness, which I know we all realize we probably have. I found some pictures of some of the things that they might have you describe to them as they're checking for these. Now remember, these folks are not ophthalmologists, but they do testing that they can pick up things that an ophthalmologist might see as well, and that your regular doctor or provider may not recognize. For instance, the loss of peripheral vision that many seniors get, and you can see in the top picture, a younger person might have really good vision as opposed to a person that's a little older and losing that peripheral vision. And when you get your driver's license reevaluated, they do check for this particular one. However, they don't check for macular degeneration in the bottom corner, where shapes get all weird, or they actually have blank spots in the middle of their vision. They may develop tunnel vision. People might develop missing part vision, blurred vision. All of these bottom pictures on that right-hand side are related to glaucoma. And obviously, if somebody's in one of those spots and you don't see them, this is a person you may hit with your vehicle. The other thing that the driver rehabilitation specialist will look is at your daily living activities. Can you do normal activities? Are you mobile well enough? Do you make good judgment? Can you get up and move around? Can you do multitasking things? All of these are very similar to driving. When you think about it, you need to be mobile enough to drive, you need to be able to assess what's going on, and you need to be able to react to what's going on. And they will look to see, are you able to do this adequately? They do often what's called a MOCA screen, and you may hear them talk about the MOCA, which stands for Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Ultimately, this screening tool does a variety of different things. Everything from, they have you draw a clock and put numbers on. They have you follow mazes and trails. They have you draw a picture. And they ask you then to name the items on the bottom corner. Can you name a lion, an elephant, and a giraffe? And you might think, well, this sounds like a silly puzzle to do. Ultimately, people who do a good job on this have got good short-term memory, good executive function, language ability, animal naming, clock drawing, abstraction, orientation, and attention. All of these things make you a better driver if you're able to do them. And as someone has less and less ability to do these, they become less and less of a safe driver. So they're looking at not only your physical ability, but also your mental ability to drive that vehicle correctly. Now, let's go out on the road and see what happens. They're going to see if you can control the vehicle. Can you get into the lane that you were trying to turn into appropriately? Can you stay in the lane you're supposed to? And they've often found that seniors have trouble staying in the lane because they tend to drift and wander. When they try to make a turn, they can't get into the lane that they're supposed to. Can they see that there's a light up there that's turning yellow, and now they know that they're going to need to start slowing down because it's going to be red pretty soon? Can they identify risk situations? Can they not only pay attention to driving the car, listening to the dog in the back nattering at you, there's somebody walking along, maybe going to cross the street, there's a car coming there, and there's another car. Can you multitask all of those things? Can you judge what's going on? Can you keep your car going the right speed? And we know many of them don't. Can they interpret traffic signs? Are they paying attention to what's going on around them? Are they managing the dog nattering in the back seat? And can they make a quick decision? All of these things that driver rehabilitation specialist is doing while you are driving, and they've got their foot really close to the brake on their side of the car, just in case you mess up. They will actually take you out on the road to see how well you function with a lot of information coming into them and then making a decision what to do. If you want to know some times, remember from several sessions ago we talked about the driver orientation screen for cognitive impairment? We know that people that can't remember a lot of things are probably not safe driving. We know that if when you go from 1 to A, to 2 to B, to 3 to C, to 4 to D, if you're having trouble doing that, called trail making, and it takes you longer than 3 minutes, you're probably not managing your vehicle well. If you can't get through the maze they give you in less than 3 minutes, or if you have a lot of errors, that is equivalent to driving errors that you make. If you can't draw the clock right, you probably will not be able to drive your car right. And if you can't get up and move well, you're probably going to have difficulty driving that vehicle. So poor performance on these different screening tests indicate a risk to safe driving, and that's why they use these. And ultimately, your occupational therapist gets you started with some of these, but that driver rehabilitation specialist runs you through all of those tests, and then that gives that information back to the doctor as well as driver and vehicular services people. So you might say, well, who would benefit from this evaluation? And many people are referred by their doctor, or they're referred by the driver vehicular services folks. But if you're worried about someone who's newly been diagnosed with cancer or cardiac problems or diabetes or lung illnesses, and it's taking a lot out of them, it might be helpful to have them be evaluated by what's going on. They have found that people with chronic medication problems can also have cognitive issues, and they have driving errors because of that. If they've had a stroke, if they've had a brain injury, or if they're confused or have a mental health issue, they may benefit from an evaluation. When the evaluation's done, ultimately that driver rehabilitation specialist can make some recommendations. Yep, you know what, they can keep driving with some restrictions. You know what, maybe they should have some driving lessons. And there's now driving lessons for seniors as well as for teens. Maybe they need some adaptive equipment, and they need to be able to pass the road test with that equipment. For instance, do they need to have a knob on their car? Do they need to have handles that help them to drive pushing the gas or pushing the brake? They may also say maybe they shouldn't be driving whatsoever. As far as restrictions, these are some of the restrictions that you may find that the driver rehabilitation specialist recommends, and sometimes these are actually on your license. Daylight driving only. See the fellow with the corrective lenses? How many of us have that one? That is a restriction. No driving on the freeway, or drive within 5 miles of home. Drive with an assisted device. Drive with your hand or brake controls. Maybe they need a bigger mirror. Maybe they need an outside mirror. Maybe they need a higher seat. And maybe they need to make sure they wear their false leg or their false arm when they're driving. But honestly, I looked these up and they were really there. And these are examples of restrictions you may run into. Some of the reasons people may have a need for adaptive equipment, and you can see on this particular car, you can see a knob on the steering wheel, you can see a handle reaching up. These are all indications that someone may not be able to use their feet to drive, but ultimately can still drive their vehicle because they have this adaptive equipment. Now, they do need to be tested with this equipment and pass their testing, but this will keep them a lot more mobile. So I think the key thing to remember is your driver rehabilitation specialist. Don't be scared to go see them, because they will do what they can to keep you driving, and sometimes they will need to recommend things like this. But if you don't go in, you don't find out. And there are many people who've had diabetic-related peripheral neuropathies, or multiple sclerosis, or Parkinson's, or even arthritis, that have thought they can't drive. And the reality is they can. They just need to go in and be evaluated and tested, and then they can maybe be out there driving. So once they're done, one of the things that the driver rehabilitation specialist may do is send a report to the doctor, who then will send it on to the Division of Driver and Vehicle Services, so that the driver's license recommends this is what you do. This particular slide and information came from Courage Kenny, which is probably well known in this area. There's a lot of other driver rehabilitation specialist groups out there, but they said it so concisely I decided to borrow their slide from them. One of the things you may run into is someone who's called a certified driver rehabilitation specialist. They actually take a special test related to this profession and have maybe a little bit more street cred, I guess is the best way to put it. If you're looking for a list of these people, you can go to the Minnesota Towards Zero Death, or MNTZD website, to find certified driver rehabilitation specialists. So if you've got someone you're worried about, if you go there, minnesotatzd.org, under Resources for Older Driver Safety, you can find the list of these CDRSs and other rehabilitation programs across all of Minnesota. A very useful resource. If you're watching this elsewhere, I just did a program in Wisconsin. They have some too. What does this cost though? Have you worried about this? This sounds like it might be an expensive thing. All the stuff that they're doing. What we have found out is that if your physician refers the driver for a clinical assessment, that can actually be billed to Medicare. So the assessment component can be billed. The behind the wheel is a fee-for-service thing, and it's not covered by insurance. But if you want to decrease the cost of this, get your physician or get your family member's physician to write a prescription to have this done. If you just want to do this proactively, you don't need a referral. It's not going to get set into insurance. You will end up paying out of pocket. But you know what? As I checked, now don't hold my toes to the fire on this, but it's only between $400 and $500 for this cost. Think about the peace of mind you'd have if you know that your senior is driving safely versus not safely. And think about what it costs to replace a fender. It's a lot less than the fender replacement. So, cost versus benefit, this is something that can help you. And if you're worried about that driver, and if the DVS people are worried about that driver, they may end up needing to have this assessment anyway. So you can proactively do it, or you can reactively do it. But know that it can be covered by insurance if you talk with the doctor. So thanks for joining us on this journey to safer driving, and drive safely out there.